How did you get into it, Bruce? Well, I think the most important thing is the trust process. Back yourself, every kid can just keep on. You know, one of the things you did do very well, got to a point where you started controlling the game again, like a puppet on the screen, so to speak. Yeah, I think we had a game plan at the beginning of the game, and luckily we executed. So there.
For a loved one. All right. So it might be that you have a family member or a friend you're worried about, but I just pray that you'll continue to get something out of this so that we can help ourselves or help those we love. Um, so let's just say that addiction for our purposes is anything that you want to stop because in some way it's having a negative effect on your life. So something that you need to stop, but you just can't seem to get there, not by yourself. And in that way, I mean, any of us can be addicted. So these principles, you don't have to be a hardcore drug addict or an alcoholic or, a gambling addict in order to have some struggles with these things. Because on some level, we all probably struggle with different things. Like, for instance, this device, do you know how addictive this thing is? I mean, would anybody admit being addicted to their phone? Because imagine what happens if you don't have it. What if you lose it? What if you break it? What if it's not charged, and you're somewhere where you got to have it? How often do you look at it? Like, there's a good question. Is when it's sitting there on your desk or wherever you are on the table, how often do you check it? Because, man, addiction is anything that Uncle G gets used to, that gets into a habit that he holds on to really tight and doesn't want to let go. The question is, the habits that rule us, are they bringing us closer to God and more healthy and more healed? Or are they distracting us and taking us away from God and clouding our mind and hardening our heart? So we're looking at our habits. Those of us that have this little difference, we have this neurotransmitter called dopamine. I think we talked about that last time. And dopamine is this amazing chemical that God gave us to where the brain is rewarded when it anticipates a reward, if that makes sense. So if, let's say, the gambler, it's not when he wins the bet that the brain releases this dopamine. It's as he's placing the bet. There's an anticipation. And when the brain begins to anticipate reward and pleasure, it starts the party early. So the heroin addict, that's tying up their arm for the needle, when the tying up begins is when the brain starts releasing this amazing dopamine that makes us just feel euphoria. So whether it's something you drink or smoke or ingest or inhale that takes you to another place and gives you a sense of euphoria, a sense of feel good, that's that chemical dopamine. Okay. And so those of us that are built like me, my brain produces a little more dopamine than the average person. And there's 1 out of 10 of us on this call. So if we have 145 devices, let's just say, gosh, that's close to a couple hundred people, 200 people. That means on average, 20 of us in any group are going to have this just genetic difference where our brain overproduces dopamine. So that means when we get a dope blast, it's more than our neighbor. And the more we get, the more we want it again. And so when I say I get hooked on anything that makes me feel good, that is very, very true, because dopamine makes us feel real good. Okay, there's two types of people, and you might be on the call because you're curious, because this whole subject might be bothering you, because you feel a little bit like, man, this could be me, but you're not sure, because that's a tough thing when somebody's like, man, I don't know if I have a drinking problem or not. And, the easy answer is, well, experiment. If you can control it, then you don't. But if you can't, you do. And so a problem, let's just use alcohol. You have a problem drinker, and then you have an alcoholic. And both of them appear the same because they overdo it, okay, at parties or at a bar or at a dinner, whatever. And so you can look at two people and say, man, those are both alcoholics. But then a consequence comes into this problem drinker's life. Let's say that he or she gets pulled over and gets what we call a DUI, driving under the influence. I'm not sure what you call it where you're from, but that DUI rocks his world and he says, I got to quit drinking or I'm not going to drink so much. And then the problem is resolved because he had a good enough reason to quit and he proved that he was a problem drinker. Now, the alcoholic can get the DUI and can swear it off and say, I'll never do it again. But then they'll go right back to it. And then they're driving drunk again. And it makes absolutely no sense. And to the family of the alcoholic, the addict, it is maddening because there's all kind of consequences. If you do it again, you're going to lose your wife. If you do it again, you're going to lose your job. If you do it again, you're going to lose your freedom. And yet they can't seem to stop doing it. And so the family feels like, man, if you really loved me, then you would stop for me. But here's the deal with this thing. You can't stop for somebody else. The brain's too powerful. So should you stop for your family? Well, sure, it's going to help your family, for your wife, for your husband, for your son or daughter, for God himself. But at the end of the day, those that get really sober are the ones that stop for themselves. I want to live, and I want to live life to the full, and I want to be close to God, and I want to be close to people, and I'm sick and tired. I'm going to quit for me. And so in this recovery movement, it's often said that recovery is a very selfish thing, which to a disciple sounds funny. It's like, that doesn't make any sense. If it's selfish, I shouldn't do it. You've got to take care of yourself for yourself, because even your wife or your kids or your job is not big enough when that brain is obsessed. Addiction is an obsession of the mind and an allergy of the body. So those that have an addiction or an addictive nature, they become obsessed. And it can be a little trigger. You know, you see something, you hear something, you feel something, and all of a sudden you're like, man, I'd like to do that. I'm working with a guy, and his problem is cocaine. And when he does that, he drinks a lot and then he blacks out, and then bad things happen that he can't remember. And he's an amazing brother. I mean, you would be blown away. His love for the lost, he takes care of the homeless. He's got this nonprofit that he's very sacrificial to. He shares his faith like crazy. I mean, the guy, he's a spiritual guy. He just has this thing. And when I was doing it's a coaching, relationship, but he's a friend, but I'm coaching him and weekly. And so last week we got on and I could just tell something was different. And he was just beat down and he was kind of stressed out. And he was saying the right things. And I knew that he was struggling, and he admitted that he was, but said he was fine. We came up with kind of let's win the day is what I always say. Just win the day. Even if it's at the end of the day, win it. Do something noble, make a move, get back on track. And so he had a great plan. He went and he went. I said, when you feed the homeless, it does something powerful to you. Go do that. When you work out, you feel better, because he's a big, strong guy. Go work out. And then there was something else. I can't remember what the third thing was. It's like, choose things that you love, that are good for you, and go do that when you're being tempted. And so he turned the corner and he sent me a good text and said, hey, I did all the things. But then I didn't hear from him for several days. And then the following week, he told me that he relapsed. And it had been a pretty good long time. He had been probably close to a year since the last time it had happened. But see, that obsession of the mind got on him, because, man, he was having some troubles in his business. He was having some troubles in his marriage. He was having some trouble with money and his nonprofit. And he just was distressed, anxious about many things. And then he got the thought, man, I could always just go to my guy and go ahead and do it. And I could tell he was already talking himself into it. Now, think about the power of Uncle G, of your brain. He gets hooked on patterns and repetition. And whatever he does a lot, he gets very good at. Whatever he gets a lot, he wants more and more of it. Okay. So the first time I ever took a drink, it was, I was probably 12 or 13. And I remember the way it made me feel. And it was just this high, happy, careless, just relaxed version of myself that was like, even at that young age, I thought, wow, that stuff is amazing. I want to do that again. And see, that high for an alcoholic or an addict, the original one is the one that we're going to chase for the rest of our lives if we don't break free. We're chasing that first experience and the way it made me feel. The problem is more that I use. See, if your dopamine level is a baseline right here, and then all of a sudden, I go and drink for the first time or whatever, it's like, whoa, I mean, the dopamine is like, whoa, this is new. And then the next time, it's about the same, it's, but then you come down and you're a little bit lower. And then, so it takes a little more dopamine to get you to the place that you got to. But then you get high and you crash and you're a little lower. Your natural dopamine level is starting to level off because you're getting it from outside sources, a drug, an alcohol, a behavior, a person, things that make that dopamine blast. And so when you get to that same level, each time you drop down further because there's shame and there's guilt and there's remorse. And so you're further down. So it takes more dopamine to get to that same level. And then the elevator is going down and you wonder, why do you drink more and more and more? And you can handle it because there's a tolerance building up inside of you. And it takes more of that alcohol to get that same response that I'm looking for. And all of this is subconscious. The Uncle G is holding on to things. And when he gets used to getting a certain chemistry, then he's going to protect that habit. And that's why it's hard to break free. And it's very hard to break free by ourselves. Diabetes is a disease. And if you have it, there's no judgment on you. It's just, oh, that's unfortunate, but it's treatable. Some people have diabetes 1, some have 2. One requires a lifestyle change. The other one requires insulin regularly. But if you follow the doctor's orders, then you can break free and you can live a normal life while you keep that diabetes in check through lifestyle and modern medicine. Alcoholism, addiction, is literally the same thing. It's just a different organ. One affects the pancreas, this one affects the brain. But see, diabetes doesn't talk to me all day. I don't have diabetes, but if I did, it doesn't talk to me all day long and try to convince me that I'm not a diabetic. That's what addiction does. It's centered in the brain. Addiction lives in your brain, and that's where we make decisions. And that's why this thing gets so crazy sometimes. And so it lives in the brain, and it's my decision maker. And it's the only disease that tries to convince the one who has it that he doesn't have it. And so we play these crazy mind games. I'm not an alcoholic. I'm not an addict. I want to read a scripture. It's in Mark 7. You can just listen along. This is when Jesus heals a deaf and mute man. It says in verse 31, then Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre and went through Sidon down to the Sea of Galilee into the region of the Decapolis. There some people brought to him a man who was deaf and could hardly talk, and they begged Jesus to place his hand on him. After he took him aside, away from the crowd, Jesus put his fingers into the man's ears. Then he spit and touched the man's tongue. He looked up to heaven and with a deep sigh said to him, Ephphatha, which means be open. At this, the man's ears were opened, his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak plainly. Jesus commanded them not to tell anyone, but the more he did so, the more they kept talking about it. People were overwhelmed with amazement. He has done everything well, they said. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. So I picture this as a young man, and he's lived in a bubble in his world because he can't hear anything that's being said to him, and therefore he can't hear himself, and he can't talk. He never learned how to talk because he never learned how to hear. Obviously, it was something he had from birth. And so he lived in this bubble, disconnected from the outside world, isolated, lonely, afraid, just not part of, and probably less than. And so in those days, if you had someone that was disabled or had a problem like that, they were, a lot of times were kind of left out and set apart. And so this young man, he probably had a lot of pain. Well, somebody wanted to get him to Jesus. Maybe they had heard that Jesus, he touches people and they're healed. He drives out demons. He performs miracles. He feeds crowds. He even calls the dead back to life. I mean, maybe he could save my son. And so imagine a big throng crowd. Now, why was there a crowd there to see Jesus? Anybody remember who we studied last week or last month? We looked at Legion, and Legion we identified with because, he was torturing himself with behaviors that he couldn't stop doing. His lifestyle had burned bridges with family and friends and his community. So he was set apart, imprisoned with chains on him. He was naked. He was bleeding. This is truly the least of these. This is a feared, hated man, probably. And then he has that encounter with Jesus, and he doesn't run away and he doesn't try to fight. He falls on his knees and he begs for mercy. And Jesus gives him exactly what he needs. And all the unclean spirits leave him. And it says that he's dressed in his right mind. See, this battle is for us to get back in our right mind. That's why, for some, medication is very important. If you lost your eyesight and just couldn't see very well, but with a certain prescription of lens, you could see clearly, there would be no shame in wearing the glasses because I can see things clearly. Addiction often is accompanied by mental illness. When you're in depression, you can't see things clearly. Everything looks dark. Everything looks hopeless. Everything is overwhelming. Just feel like, man, I can't do that. It's too much. And then all of a sudden you put the glasses on and you see that things are hard, but there's also so much light. And yeah, things are scary, but I've always got hope, and yeah, I fail, but that doesn't define me. I'm going to get up again. I'm going to rise up. And what it was you were able to adjust your eyesight and see the world more like it really is. And those that are struggling with these things, this addiction and the things that come with it, the incredible anxiety. Mornings are very hard for someone that struggles with alcohol or drugs. Mourning is where the shame comes in, or the fear of the future, the anxiety of the unknown, or what the regret for whatever you might have done the night before. And it's so stressful because it's a scary, scary, isolating disease. And this boy, man, he was trapped in it. And this is cool. I love this encounter. Jesus comes to him and he pulls him away from the crowd. And then he's face to face with this boy. This is his moment, right? There were times when Jesus did his miracles publicly, so that the whole crowd could hear when he prayed and called out Lazarus. Okay, that was specifically done for an audience to see the power of God. There were other times with the man with the withered hand. He said in front of the Pharisees, stretch out your hand. He wanted them to see. And, a lot of times when he healed the centurion's servant who was, in real trouble, he did it from a distance. He didn't even have to go. So he had all ways that he could heal people. But this one, he took him away from the crowd. He just wanted him to be away. He didn't want it to be a spectacle, and he wanted it to be authentic. See, Anonymity is very powerful. And I want to say this, what we talk about on here, or who you see on here, we don't know if they're here because they have a problem, or they just want to know more, or a loved one is struggling, or they're confused and not sure. But whatever brings somebody here, the anonymous part of this program is so important, because there's so many people that don't understand, what we go through, and they judge. And it was easy to judge this young man. And I think that Jesus was like, this guy's already the center of attention. And I don't want him. I want him to be real with me. And so sometimes God will take you away one-on-one by yourself. And the first place that this thing starts is just between you and your God. Man, we got to be honest about the things that we struggle with, to honest with ourselves. This addiction, it can, here are some of the signs. One, we play hide and seek. It's like you can't ever pin down, the deceit is a part of this disease, because we have to hide our behavior when we're not doing good. And sometimes people even hide whatever their substance is. You can hide alcohol. I remember near the end of my, struggle, I was getting boxes of wine. I don't know if y'all have those. Instead of a bottle of wine, it's a box of wine, which is not very good wine. But the reason I was getting it is because I wanted to be able to drink as much as I wanted to, and you couldn't tell how much was in it. Now, see, that's not normal. But to somebody that struggles with these things, that's one of the games that we play. It's hide and seek, catch me if you can. And so it's this double life, and it hurts us. It's not something that you try to do or that you enjoy doing. It's that this disease is so rooted in, when someone is in addiction, meaning, let's say that you're have an addiction to prescription medication. Some painkillers are very, very dangerous. Some people have to have them to live. A lot of people don't. They can get hooked on them because you get your tooth pulled or something. Or whether it be, something that takes you the other way. Maybe you're just, really hooked on Adderall, which is speed, which helps people focus with ADHD, but a lot of people are abusing it. And so when you're in active addiction, meaning that you're an alcoholic and you're still drinking, you're a drug addict, you're still using, you're a gambler and you're broke and you can't stop gambling, or maybe it's a computer screen, you're looking at things that you can't stop. You keep saying, I'm not going to do it again. Disease, this addiction disease, it lives in the primitive brain, in the deep original part of the brain. God made this brain, and it's got a primitive stem, and then it branches out. Front part of the brain, the frontal lobe, is where all your decisions are made. That's, I'm going to go here, I'm going to wear this, I don't think I'll do this, what should I do today, how to handle this situation, here's a goal that I have, here's an idea I have. All that's happening in the frontal lobe, the neocortex, right? Addiction is way back here in what they call the reptilian brain. This part of our brain we share with snakes, same DNA. It is instinct and survival. It's fight, flight, preserve, life. Okay, so if you don't even have to make fight or flight, start. It's that when we perceive a threat, the fight or flight mechanism starts, and it's literally life or death. So if you're addicted to a chemical and you're not giving the brain that chemical, the brain starts acting as if it's life and death if you don't get that thing. And that's why you'll see addicts steal, lie, just hide, defend, avoid, resist, is because the brain wants what it wants. Let me give you an example. If you've ever gotten addicted to caffeine, now that one doesn't have a lot of heavy consequences, because you drink too much caffeine, you just get agitated. Maybe it's not good for your heart, but it's not like there's a lot of terrible consequences that come with a caffeine addiction. But I got hooked on caffeine. Why? Because I liked it, and I was drinking coffee in the morning. Then the afternoon, I was drinking power drinks. And, I don't know how many idea how much caffeine I was drinking. And then I went on a trip and I couldn't find my Starbucks. And I was on the West Coast, and this was years ago. And I was 3 hours, behind. And my brain produced the most splitting headache and the most terrible nausea and almost made me throw up. And my head was banging like this because I didn't give it its caffeine. And guess what I did? I went to the store and I got a Diet Coke. And when I took the first sip, it all subsided. The headache was gone. The nausea was gone. Uncle G said, "Thank you very much." He won. He won that battle, because that was a habit that I had established. So that's what's maddening about this thing is those of us that struggle with this, man, we'll go to great lengths in order to get what we want. And so I'm going to encourage you, if you feel like there's something in your life that is not helping you, then you got to go after getting help and getting healing just as much as you went after getting whatever that thing is. Now, Jesus took this boy away from the crowd, and then he does something very interesting. It says he takes he spits on his hand and he puts his finger in the boy's ear. I mean, think about how personal we got to be, how close we got to be. If I walked up there and did that to Ivor, I come to South Africa and I walk up behind him and I put my finger in his ear. Like you got to be really, really close to get away with something like that, right? And Jesus, that's what he does. He puts his finger in his ear, then he licks his hand and he touches his tongue. Now, I don't even know how you can't even get close. I can't have a brother and us get that close to where it's like I put my hand in his mouth. But that's what Jesus did. I mean, I want you to see how personal Jesus is. And he wants to get real close, like intimately close. Intimacy means becoming one, mentally one, emotionally one, spiritually one, like really connected. The two have become one. Intimacy is usually used in a physical sense. I'm talking about, man, he wants to get really close. Why did he put his finger in the ear and touch the man's tongue? Because that's where his pain was. Jesus is going to touch you where you're hurting. And see, until you're ready to be healed, you're not going to let him touch you. And you might be wondering, how come I can't get close to God? How come I just feel like he's so far away? How come it works for everybody else but me? It's because something deep inside is hurting you and you're not willing to deal with it. You see, the alcoholism or the gambling or the food addiction or the shopping or the rage, whatever's got a hold of you, it's coming from a wound that's deep down inside that oftentimes we're medicating. Man, I didn't want to be where I was, in 2004 when I totally bottomed out, but I was hurting so bad inside. Alcohol was the only thing I felt like I had. See, if you're struggling with drugs or alcohol or some behavior, it's not your problem, it's your solution. Think about it. When you get real stressed out, you reach for that drink. You get real angry, you reach for that drug. You get depressed, you reach for that pill. You get really, really sad, you get really happy and celebrate, reach for that drug or that drink or that behavior. And we never ever grow. Now, here's an interesting fact. If you go back and figure out when did you first start using the thing that's got a hold of you, okay, whatever that thing is. And let's say in my case, it got real heavy when I was like 16 or 17. Okay, at that point right there, that's when I stopped emotionally growing. And for as long as we use after that, you don't grow emotionally. And the reason why is because you don't ever experience a feeling. You know, when you get mad, get high, get sad, get high, get glad, get high. So you're not experiencing normal human emotion. You know, everybody gets a little down when something bad happens, but you're supposed to feel it. Some people get angry sometimes when things happen, and you need to experience that. You know, life can make you very anxious. It gets very scary. But if you reach for the thing that's outside to try to heal a problem that's inside, that's when we start getting into trouble. And so the only way for me to truly heal this is to heal what was hurting me inside. For me, a lot of that was wrapped around my father, because he and I had a very, very complex relationship when I was growing up. And I always said, man, I'll never be like my old man. Won't ever be like him, because he wasn't real happy a lot of times and he wasn't real nice a lot of times. My dad was a good man. Okay. He taught me to respect authority. He taught me how to treat women. He taught me how to obey. He taught me a lot of things. He was a hard guy in a lot of ways, but he taught me what was right. He was a great salesman. You know, he was the life of the party. He was a loyal friend. He worked for the same company his whole career. He was he loved his family like crazy. I mean, my dad, he told me he loved me all the time. I think we got somebody that needs to mute. Um,
Okay. Fego.
my dad has so much. Oh, now I'm getting a little echo. Again, Ivor, can we mute everybody? Is that it? Ivor, can you still hear me, buddy?
Yeah, I think everybody's muted now.
Okay, good. You look like you had froze on me a little bit. But here's the deal, man. He had so many things. You know, I adored my dad. You know, I feared him, but he was like my hero until I got into my teenage years. But this disease, it doesn't care who you are. I mean, great people have this little mental difference inside. But if you don't deal with it, it's going to win. We can't beat it. The only way to deal with it is to abstain from it. We've got to get away from it. And we've got to figure out what's hurting us inside. If all we do is go to the doctor and tell them what the symptom is, to get a pill to make me feel different, we're not dealing with the root of the problem. And the root of a lot of my problem was my relationship with my dad, because when he died, this disease took my dad. I mean, my dad is dead because of this disease, and that's the only reason why. And see, what was hard for me is we were not cool when he died. And so I had so much inside of me. I was mad at him for leaving me. You know, I was sad because he was gone. I was ashamed because I wasn't there for him. And so these are deep things. Now, if you've got something like that hurting you inside, well, no wonder over the years you're going to be trying to medicate and change the way you feel, because the part that's really hurting you is being covered up. And so whenever you stop drinking, okay, so emotionally, if I use from 17 to 37, then I get sober at 37 and my brain starts to get healthy again, I pick up emotionally that like I'm 17, because you pick up wherever you started using from. And so emotionally we need healing. And that's why relationships are even more important for those of us who struggle. More important. I've got to have deep relationship with brothers in my life, and brothers who know me, and ones that have earned the right, you know, for us to have sacred conversations because they've been there. I mean, I've got 2 or 3 brothers that I can call at any time, and we do life together. I don't just call them when I'm in trouble. We get on Zooms every week. We talk about our marriages. We talk about our families. We talk about our kids and our heartaches. You know, we talk about addiction. We talk about just real life. And I'm talking about a deep relationship. You know, we can cry together. We can express our fears. We can express our shame. Because if I really start healing and covering my shadows with love and light, see, that's the power of James chapter 5. It's not that I'm going to confess my sin to another so that I can be forgiven. It says I'm going to confess my sin to another so that I can be healed. Because that's the disease inside of me, is whatever that root is. The question is, ask yourself, why do you drink to excess? Or why do you abuse that drug or that behavior or that relationship? You can get hooked on a person, and that person is bad for you. Now, I'm not talking about in a marriage. We've got to fight for each other in, one life. I get it. But man, if I don't have relationships, this brain will win because he's relentless. But here's the deal. The cool thing is, the more that you get in touch, first step is honesty. Then you've got to let another person into your life. Then you start shedding with love and light. This is why sponsors are so important. If you want to get your body in shape, hire a trainer. If you want to learn a new language, hire a tutor. If you want to get your finances together, hire an advisor. Well, if you want to overcome an addiction, there's two things you've got to have. You need somebody who has already overcome it that can teach you the way out. That's huge. I've got to have somebody. Now, the just as important is I've got to have somebody that knows how I think. And that's why we need people in recovery who have recovered themselves and that understand the game. Because addicts are the most manipulative, the most charismatic. A lot of times you'll see somebody, or somebody will have a loved one and they want me to work with them, and they'll say, yeah, he struggles with this, but he's a really great person. And they'll start telling me all these great things. And I'm like, of course he is, man. Alcoholics and addicts, a lot of times, are very charming, very charismatic, very persuasive, great people skills. But also there can be a manipulation underneath, because we want to get what we want, or we want to get out of the trouble, or we want to stay in hiding and make sure nobody knows. And it's just this maddening life. But when I really, really wanted to get sober, when I finally had enough, and I want to ask you, whatever's got you on this call, what are you willing to do to be free from whatever that thing is? Like, what lengths are you willing to go to? How open are you willing to get? Jesus touched this young man where he hurt. And Jesus wanted to touch me where I really hurt. And that was me and my dad. And we had to do some soul work because my dad was gone. He's been gone since 1988. And I've been doing a lot of soul work. And then when you're kids, we got to be careful. Kids don't do what we say, they do what we do. And so if you are in that cycle of addiction and you have kids, understand that you might not think they understand. They might not even understand, but they see, and we become what we see. And that's why this thing runs in families. And so your recovery, it's time to deal with this thing. You might be the one that breaks the cycle of addiction for your whole family line forever. It might be one of the reasons you are put on this planet, because my great-granddad drank a lot. My grandfather drank a lot and made him not a nice man. My dad drank a lot and it killed him. And then look at what was happening in my life. I was on my way to either dying in a car crash or killing somebody in a car crash and going to prison. And that's very, very real. That's what this disease does. It does not play. It doesn't care who you are. Kill, steal, and destroy. This thing is an enemy, a thorn. And we got to take it real serious. If you dealt with your one thing, how would it change your marriage? Oh, there we go. How would it change your profession? How would it change the relationship you have with your kids? How would it change your sanity if you could deal with that one thing? You see, once you, in the same way that we have a baptism date, in recovery, we have another birthday. And that's the day that you said, enough is enough. And I got to that point, and I was finally beaten into a state of reasonableness. And I went to a recovery house where they were having meetings, 12-step meetings. And I went in there and I looked around and nobody looked like me. And I don't mean skin color and all that. It's just that it wasn't, where I usually hang out, or the people that I necessarily look like, which turned out to be a very good thing. And none of them were part of the church. None of them. I mean, I wanted to be outside of the church where nobody knew me, where I could have someone help me that wasn't seeing me through the lens of an evangelist or, whatever they think of me. And so I found the guy in the room that had been sober for the longest amount of time, which was like 30 years. And I walked up to him, introduced myself, and I said, I need a sponsor. Will you help me? And this guy said, well, I don't know if I'm the one to do it, but if you need help. And his name was Big John. Everybody called him Big John. And he was kind of country, and he was older than me, and he was a great big old guy. But you know what he knew? He knew sobriety. He knew recovery. And he walked me through those 12 steps. And I never was successful. The first step is that you admit you are powerless over alcohol and that your life is unmanageable. Think about that question. Think about your one thing that still got you enslaved. Can you get to the point where you can admit that you are powerless over this substance or behavior, and that your life is not manageable? It's hurting you. It's hurting your life. It might be hurting your wife. It could be hurting your parents, that my life has become unmanageable. And then the second one is you came to believe that a power greater than yourself, that God, could restore you to sanity if he was sought. See, if we're stuck in addiction, our lives have become unmanageable, and we're operating in a state of insanity. And you've probably heard the definition of insanity is doing the same things over and over and expecting different results. You know where this thing goes. So one, can you admit that you're powerless over it? Two, can you admit that you believe that God can and will restore you to sanity? Just like Legion, dressed and in your right mind. Just like the prodigal son, when he came to his senses, he came back to God. And then three, made a decision to turn your will over to God. A decision. See, those that quit and then relapse and quit and relapse and quit and relapse, that was me. I'd say I'm done, and I'd go and I'd pick up a chip, and that means that, you're quitting. And I'd last about a month and I'd mess up again. And then I might go 2 months and I'd mess up again. I'd make it maybe 3 months and I'd mess up again, because I never was doing number three, was to completely turn my will over to the care of God completely. Your will be done. And I know we know that one. If we don't turn our will over, maybe it's because we don't believe number two, which is God can heal me, and he can deal with this. And maybe it's because you hadn't really done number one, which is admit that you're powerless over it. So Jesus touched him right where he hurt, and he healed him. And all of a sudden his ears were open and his mouth was loosened, and he could talk and he could hear. And I want you to imagine what he used his voice in his ears for after Jesus gave it back. Because I've been telling you this. The first question was, do you want to get well? And you got to be careful how you answer that. Because for me, if I say, please help me overcome this thing, set me free from it. I want to be sober. I want to be clean. I want to be free. And then he does that for me. And he touches me. And I deal with my pain. Well, now it's time for my purpose. What do you think he wants me to use my sobriety for? To help others be free. What if I tried to be sober just for me and I didn't care about the suffering alcoholic? You know why I'm doing this for y'all? And because it helps me. You can't keep anything that you don't give away. And if I don't give my sobriety away, if I don't give my hope or my faith or my love away, then I'm not going to be able to keep it. And so I went to this guy, John, and I said, help me. And he took me through these steps. Number 4 is that you make a searching, fearless moral inventory and you admit the exact nature of your wrongs. In order to get truly sober, I had to really deal with the wreckage that I'd caused. And see, that drug almost took my life. It did take my ministry, but there was a whole lot of shame. Now, biggest enemies to sobriety, resentment and shame. Be careful with resentment. Resentment lets the devil have a foothold in the heart. And if your resentment is against your wife, or it's against your leader, or a friend that might have hurt you, man, for an addict, we can't afford to be resentful. We just can't, because your heart is everything. If you're struggling with this addiction thing, it's like you've got to be able to live an honest life, and we've got to deal with conflict when it comes. I don't have the luxury of, if Ivor, hurt me really bad and I was really upset and I was mad, and I don't have the luxury of not talking to him, because somebody that is built like us, that will lead us back to whatever it is we medicate with. Now, the further you get from that day, see, today could be your birthday. Today could be the day that you say, I'm done. I'm going to get serious. I'm going to find somebody that I can trust, somebody that understands this disease, and I'm going to tell them the truth about what's going on with me, and we're going to put together a plan, and I'm going to get this thing done. You got to get to that point. See, because otherwise you've never truly made a decision. I made a whole bunch of I had a notion that I would quit, or I had an idea that I would quit, or I would experiment with quitting, or I'd try to quit. But on December 27th, 2005, I made a decision. And it's just like the decision you made when you said, I'm going to follow Jesus. And you repented, you turned to him, you experienced amazing grace, and he set you free, and he gave you the power of the Holy Spirit. And now maybe you've let the enemy back in. And it can happen to anybody, man. A preacher too. That's exactly what it is. So, a couple more things, and then we're going to open it up with the time that we have left. I want to remind you, I think last time we talked about the dark passenger. I want to kind of bring that up again. Paul had a thorn. The thorn was not him. The thorn was a messenger from the evil one, sent to torment Paul because of his nature of being conceited and not needing God. And so God used the devil to get his work done. And this thorn, Paul hated the thorn. He pleaded with God, take it away. Anybody that deals with this thing, man, we don't want it. There's so much that comes with it, the shame and the disconnection and the isolation and the depression that comes with it. We don't want it. Take it away. Man, I could be so much better if you would take this away. And if you just make my head right so I don't have to want everything so much. Or why do I got to get hooked on stuff? And I found that I was fighting my own nature, and I was hating a huge part of myself. But then I figured out the key in this scripture is I don't have to hate myself, because that thorn is not me. And if I go back to my true image, I am made in the image of the King. That means that everything he is, I have inside of me as pure potential. Everything that you admire about God, anything that you admire about another brother or sister, whether that is integrity or loyalty or honesty or humility or just love and compassion or courage, you know, the things that we admire about other people, the things that we love about God, his amazing grace and his fierce love and his perfection in everything. You're made of that, period. Pure stuff. You're made of pure God stuff. But see, where the enemy deceives is he accuses and he deceives. He accuses and he deceives. And he tries to get me to buy his lies. He can't touch me, but he can deceive me and he can accuse me. And those of us that struggle with this, and those that have family members, I want you to hear this. The one that's struggling might not look like they're suffering. They might look more angry and defensive. And every time you try to challenge them, they act out or they run away. Understand that what's going on inside of them is a battle, a fierce battle against ourselves. See, but the only way that I can truly forgive myself is to separate myself from the shadow, from that sin nature, from that addiction, and start realizing that this thing is a very valuable messenger that came from God. I used to sit in these meetings and I'd be sitting there and some old guy been in there forever and been sober for 1,000,000 years, he would say something like, "I'm so grateful for my disease." And I would look at him and I was still just struggling with it. And I thought that he was crazy or he was a liar, you know, because why would anybody be grateful for this thing? But now years later, and I see what it's done for me. Man, sobriety and getting my head clear and understanding the chemistry that helps me see clearly so I can do what I need to do. I've learned to value the thorn. I was talking to my son just a little while ago before we were here, and we were talking about some of these things, and he said the key is to love myself. And I said, it's the whole deal, man. The key is to love yourself. Do you? Are you mad at yourself all the time? Have you forgiven yourself? These are things where the disease loves to grow. Deceit, it grows well. You know, avoidance, lashing out, pride. I mean, disease thrives in pride, thrives in selfishness, thrives in deceit. These things protect the disease. And then that dark passenger has actually gotten a place in my life. And now it's easy to start thinking he is me and I am him. I am an addict. I am an alcoholic. I am whatever it is. And we've lost connection from who we really, really are. I want you to consider loving yourself and being more patient with yourself. And we're afraid. It's like, man, if I love myself, I'm going to keep doing this thing, man. I got to fight myself because I got to overcome the sinful nature. But here is a universal law and principle. Whatever I resist, I strengthen. Whatever I fight against, I make stronger. That's why we go into a gym and we pick up weights and we resist, because whatever we resist, we strengthen. Whoever you fight, they're going to be stronger. And you're going to, that's when fights happen, is I'm resisting a person. So Jesus says, do not resist an evil person. Love is the only thing that can drive out hate. Light's the only thing that can drive out darkness. Jesus healed with love and light, and he did it in such a graceful way. And those of us that struggle with these things, man, a lot of times we're the hardest on ourselves. We're not as hard on other people as we are on ourselves. And this journey to recovery is about learning to love yourself, learning to forgive yourself, and learning to protect yourself because you value yourself. The longer we live in denial and the longer we live in disease, dis-ease, man, I got no ease in my life, man. I got no peace in my life. The longer we live like that, the more shame we become. And eventually we just stop believing altogether because we feel like a fraud. Imagine the intense battle that was going on inside of me when I'd catch a little buzz on Saturday night and then preach on Sunday morning. There were holes in my gospel. There were things I couldn't preach about because I wasn't being true. I knew better. And so we rationalize so that the brain can get what it wants. Let me say one more thing about that. If I hate a part of my nature, it's like when Jesus said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. And that is the divided man, the double-sided man. You're hating yourself and then you're trying to love others. This dark passenger, it needs to be quarantined and it needs to be minimized so it can ride in the back seat. And the way you're going to do it is through the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit. Man, this golden ball of light that lives inside of you, that's pure God stuff. It's the eternal you. When you are laid down to rest, it is the true you that is going to go back to the source. See, everything that's going to be in the box after I'm gone is not really me. The true me is that golden ball of light that is pure spirit. It's Holy Spirit. It's God inside of me. Now, if I really believe that, and I believe that he's the comforter, I don't need drugs. He's the comforter. He's my advocate. He's always fighting for me. I don't have to defend. I can be honest. He's the counselor. He's going to teach me things because this is a battle we're in. And so if you're struggling with these things and don't have any connection to the Holy Spirit, Jesus said, ask the Father. Ask him. He says, what father is going to, his son asks him for some bread, is going to give him a snake? He said, you're not even great fathers. You don't even do that. God's the perfect Father, and he's given you the Holy Spirit. He said, in the same way, won't he give the Holy Spirit to those who ask him? Pray for the Spirit. Light is what heals disease, but the first step is honesty. And the second is bring somebody into your battle. And then the third is be willing to go to any lengths to be free. Usually that, I don't know of anybody that's overcome it all by themselves. And if you can, God bless you. That's awesome. But if you can't, last, the least of these. Jesus said, whatever you do for the least of these brothers of mine, you do for me. When I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink. When I was a stranger, you invited me in. When I was sick, you came and tended to me. When I was naked, you clothed me. And when I was in prison, you came to visit me. The least of these. Those that struggle with addiction, they understand hunger because they're so hungry for acceptance and validation and forgiveness. Man, those that struggle with addiction and mental health issues, they're thirsty because they want something to take away that pain or fill me up or help me find my joy. They're strangers because they feel like nobody understands them. They feel separated and have this life that they don't want, but it's hard to give it up and it's maddening. You feel like a stranger in your own house. Naked. Man, we feel naked in our addiction, like we're just uncomfortable. You don't feel comfortable in your own skin. And so you've learned to reach for things outside to try to fix something inside, which doesn't work. The sick, mental illness comes along with the addiction many times. Sometimes the mental illness produces the addiction because you're medicating. And the last one is the prisoner. See, we're in a prison of our own mind, and God desperately wants to set you free. So people that are friends and family of the addict or the alcoholic, they're the hungry, they're the thirsty, they're the naked, they're the stranger, they're the sick, and they're definitely the prisoner. And he says, whatever you do for the least of these, you do for me. So how we treat the person who is suffering is how we're treating Jesus. And so I want you to think of the person that you've judged or that you've, you know, that you don't understand. And I want you to think of them in terms of the least of these. And I want you to think of them as Jesus himself. And I want you to remember when he said, when I was in prison, you came to visit me. You didn't come to scold me. You didn't come to threaten me. You didn't come to disciple me or train me or save me or convert me. You came to visit with me. Now, to those who are struggling, you've heard me say that. To the whole church, you need to leave the 99 and go after the one. And that those that are hurting, we need to visit with them and show them love. You've heard me say it. And so now people very well might try to do that with you. And I want to encourage you to receive them, to allow them to love you, to allow them to commune with you. Because if you keep pushing people away, every time a spouse or a child or a friend or a brother or a leader tries to get into your life, and you keep fighting them and you keep pushing them and you keep denying it, or you keep avoiding it, or you keep resisting and fighting anybody that tries to help you, man, that's just like Legion. Legion he had his shot, and he had one shot. I told the brother that struggled last week, I said, bro, I don't know if you have another relapse in you, man. Because a lot of times we can think, man, I'm just going to go out and do it one more time. We might not have another chance. And so when someone comes to you and they're trying to do the right thing, receive them. Let them help you, or at least don't run away from them, because you're going to need them. If you're the one who's struggling, you need people loving you. And to those that don't know what to say, please don't make the mistake of saying nothing. Please don't make the brother or sister feel even farther away because of their disease. You don't judge the diabetic. Man, be gracious with the alcoholic. It's a mental disease. However, this is kind of the last thing I would say. If you're living with someone who's lost an addiction and they're not ready to change, you got to protect yourself first. You got to make sure that you don't get sick around the other ones. In my household, God bless my dad, all of us were sick because, man, we had to tiptoe around, try not to upset anything, try not to get caught doing anything, wondering why is he mad. And it's like the whole family was sick as we were all moving around, kind of insecure, and all of us had to get help. This is a family disease. And so I know there are groups for families. There got to be. I think it's worldwide. And here it's called Al-Anon. And again, sometimes we have to go outside of the church to get the help we need. And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't know that churches are very well equipped to handle addiction and depression. If someone loses, has a tragic event in their life happen, a lot of times the church isn't equipped for that kind of ministry. But there are great organizations and groups outside of the church that could save your life, because they don't know you, they don't judge you, they don't have history on you, there's no spiritual connection. It's just, hey, I'm a recovering alcoholic and you want to be. Let's do life together with no shame. And nobody needs to know your business at all. But we got to let people help us. I pretty much rambled the whole time, Ivor. And so I'm not sure if hopefully I put some things out there that'll help some people. We probably have a minute or two for a question, if you'd like. But I didn't finish that thought. One of the sisters in the beginning said, she used the word detachment. Detachment is when I completely let go of the situation and I literally hand them to God and I let go of it. And I try to stop controlling it, and I allow the other person to do what they're going to do, because, they're going to get to the point where they're going to be broken. But if we continue to try to control their behavior, you will get sick too. And you've got to protect yourself from the one who's ill. And then the one who's ill finally will get to the point where I got to, which is, the pain of staying the same far outweighs the pain of changing. So I think I'll change. And then you let somebody help you. That's what I've got, Igor.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kit.